People have been asking me how I do that. So my plan is to show you the easiest way in order to one-shot bosses. So the rest of this video is going to be me explaining a basic standard Hoda build with a few small adjustments I made in order to be able to one-shot easier. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what you need to do in order to be able to one-shot bosses, no problem. Now, first things first, this is not entirely my build. This is actually built upon different advice I've received from different people, as well as the in-game Hoda build off Maxtro. So I'm going to pull that up now, and I'm also going to put a link in the description in case you wish to find this. I'm basically using the same Paragon board, though I do diverge when it comes to things like some legendaries, etc. And there were a few tips from Rob I have implemented. So it's not 100% the same as this guy, but this is a good starting point, and I do use this Paragon board. So I'm going to point out that this will work without your glyphs being leveled. It actually worked for me as early as like level 80. I was basically able to one-shot everything. So the Paragon board, while it is the one I'm following, is not necessarily 100% required even. I also want to shout out Rob for giving me the tip about metamorphosis, keeping it level 1 in order to make your unstoppable not last as long, therefore making it easier for you to continually proc your unstable, or I should say unstoppable, over and over again for things like Tibalt's Will. You deal increased damage while unstoppable, and for 4 seconds after, when you become unstoppable, you gain 50 of your primary resource. This effectively is a generator that allows you to constantly have more and more resource without actually doing anything to gain the resource other than just using your space bar. This is a really good tip, so you actually don't want to level your metamorphosis. Shout out to Rob for this one. I'll have a link to his channel as well. So now that we have the shout-outs and credits out of the way, let's actually explain what it is about the build that is making this work. Obviously, this is a Hammer of the Ancients build. So if you go to the skill tree, this is once again the same as the max row skill tree, though I think I have a couple points in some separate areas. For instance, they max out like the raid leader and the guttural yell in order to get some defensive properties, whereas I have 1 point in bash for a reason I'll show you, and I kind of max out some of these other points around here. I believe it's down here. I take like wall up, brute force, heavy-handed, etc., whereas they're going a little bit more defensive for things like nightmare dungeons. However, the skill tree is primarily the same. We're going to have, I'm going to do 1 point in bash. I'll explain why. We're going to take lunging strikes with berserking. We're going to get as much of the Hammer of the Ancients as we possibly can with Furious Hammer of the Ancients. And then we're going to go down here. We're going to take Imposing Presence 3. We're going to take Martial Vigor 3 for the damage reduction, though that wouldn't 100% be required in order to do this damage. I am going to take Tactical Rallying Cry just for the additional gain. We do take Challenging Shout to gain more bonus maximum life, though I don't actually use it to one-shot the bosses, but maximum life would help as well for your damage. Then we do a Power War Cry. This does give you additional damage. I like to extend the shout's duration for reasons I'll show you in just a moment. And then I have 1 point in this shout heals just to have a passive heal. We take Aggressive Resistance and Prolific Fury in order to gain more generation and damage reduction. I have increased damage versus close enemies with Pit Fighter. And then I take a point here for Fortify, as well as when you're fortified for over 50%, you deal increased damage. We're basically trying to get as many of the multiplicative bonuses as we can. You're going to see that here too with Heavy-Handed for more increased damage. We have the Brute Force here, which is 45% increased damage when using two-handed, which we're using Hammer of the Ancients, which is bludgeoning, so we will be. And then speaking of bludgeoning, we have 15% increased damage if they're stunned or vulnerable, and they will be vulnerable because if we go here, taking that metamorphosis for the gain like we talked about as well. But on top of the metamorphosis here, whenever you enemies are cursed, they become vulnerable as well. And what happens when you dash through them is you actually inflict them with a curse. So this one pairs with Prey on the Weak, which makes them vulnerable just by dashing through them. However, we also will get vulnerable through the Glyphs Exploit when we look at the Paragon board. So that's another way to get it as well when your shouts, etc., can actually inflict this type of stuff. But we'll go ahead and continue with the build here. So that is what it looks like in terms of the build. We do take a Wrath of the Berserker all the way because, again, more bonus to the damage. And then we are going to be taking Unbridled Rage as the keystone for increased damage and more fury cost. We don't really have to worry about the more fury cost. Again, it's about one-shotting people. Now, our entire build is going to be built around this one-shot concept. So, for instance, I take the ring that we get from Varshan. What this does is after spending 100 Fury, it generates and guarantees you a critical strike on your next ability that is like a core skill. For instance, Hammer of the Ancients, Upheaval, or Death Blow. Not necessarily core skill, but of those 3 moves. So, Hammer of the Ancients is one of those, and that's what we're going to be using. So, this gives me a guaranteed crit. Now, I can proc this just by generating some Fury and doing 2 of these. Now, I know the next guaranteed one is there, and that will store basically forever. Now, I take the gloves that do, after swapping weapons, your skill or overpower, and then that's this number right here, and I take Bash for this reason. So I can swap between Bash and the basic, and just real quick, it's an easy way to guarantee overpower. So now you can see, and there's other ways to do this, but this is just the way that I've made it work. And this will give me the guaranteed crit here, as well as will give me the guaranteed overpower. So now I know my next Hammer of the Ancients will 100% be a critical and overpower. Now, if I accidentally attack or something, it's going to drop that, and we have to switch weapons again and do the double basic attack until I get it again. So you just make sure your next one's going to be the Hammer of the Ancients, and that's when you effectively use your ability to give yourself rage, you buff your damage, and then bang, that's a one-shot. So that's sort of how these 2 mechanics work together. Now, we also are going to be getting guaranteed overpowers through the Banished Lord's Talisman. There's another way to acquire this as well. I like having all of these options so we get as many overpowers as possible, and we actually do get more guaranteed overpowers through the Paragon Board as well. So there is a few ways to get guaranteed overpower, but moving along. The helmet here is the Mighty Helmet, and when we gain Berserking, you have a chance to become enraged, granting even increased damage and fury per second. So this obviously seems good, because we're looking for more damage, anything that's going to one-shot. The chest plate, I am using Disobedience for armor because my armor is fairly low, but this also gives me a little bit of damage with 2-handed bludgeoning. Basically, this is just your kind of your pick that can waver in between whatever you think you really need for either more damage, more defenses. My resistances are low, so I kind of had to go with some poison resistance there in order to catch up on poison resistance. You can see I'm not fully maxed, but we're getting close to resistances. You've already seen the gloves, but I will talk about the stats on the gloves. I take overpower damage. I want the +4 ranks of Hammer of the Ancients. I think it's important. I do the chance to restore primary. You don't need this. It's actually pretty much not required for this. I do like having critical strike chance and the primary resource generation, just so that when I'm going through nightmare dungeons, etc., it's a little bit easier, just hammer, 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 but again, not really required, okay? This one, however, is a big buff up, which is the T-Balt's Will, the pants. I talked about why this is, but because of the way that the tip that Rob gave us about keeping Metamorphosis level 1, this is going to generate our Fury, as well as give us increased damage from these pants. So these are a very good option to have. In fact, I would say they're basically mandatory. The boots here are going to be double movement speed and then resistances. Now this one, what I did was I actually put on the primos, which makes it where it has a chance to extend the duration of Berserking. We do take damage while Berserking. There are things on the Paragon board they'll give us damage while Berserking, so we want to have Berserking up. I went with the Edge Masters on a 2-hand for 40% when we have primary resource maxed out. And again, this is a bludgeoning weapon. This is the one we're going to be using primarily, so we want this damage to be as high as possible. I did damage while Berserking, damage to bleeding, though I would have preferred close damage or anything else really than bleeding. Core skill and overpower, really like those ones. Overpower is pretty much what's doing all our damage in this one, so I definitely would be trying to get overpower in your weapons. I went with double maces because of the same deal, overpower, and each point of fury you generate while maximum grants your next core skill. Again, Hammer of the Ancients is a core skill, so we have limitless rage here on a mace as well, and I went with strength and overpower were kind of the ones I was focusing on. You could do damage while Berserking, for instance. And then here I got overpower, core, critical damage, strength. Again, I'm looking for strength. I'm looking for overpower. And then for the bonus here, for the aspect, I went with the Berserk Ripping, okay, which is inflicts your damage as bleeding and while you're Berserking. And the reason I did that is so that they would get the bleeding passive on them, and then I could get the bonuses from bleeding. It just makes itemization a little easier. It's probably not technically the best min-max one, but I liked it because it made it easy, and the whole point of this build is just to easily guarantee a one-shot anytime I wanted to help somebody with a boss or something like that. Then we have the Ancestral Force, which is Hammer of the Ancients. I have a bad roll on this one, but I put this on a 2-hand. I notice a lot of people don't put this on a 2-hand. I couldn't tell you the math as to why, but this one definitely seemed like, for me, I wanted to put it on a 2-hand. I went with strength, all stats. I wish I had overpower on this one. I don't, but once again, it would be nice to have overpower, but that's basically what I ran with that. Now, I did do, For the rings here, obviously I went with this ring just to make it guaranteed, to make it easier. But this ring, I went with Shouts, generates fury per second. This is mostly for nightmare dungeons, etc. It makes it a little bit easier to go through. But you can see here I got critical strike chance, overpower, physical damage, close. I'm just looking for DPS. I mean, we're one-shotting the bosses, so we're not really worried about survivability as much. I'm just looking for that overpower, critical strike chance for nightmare dungeons. And then we obviously used a Banished Lord's Talisman. You get plus ranks of core skills. You get more guaranteed overpowers, which is good on the boss with increased damage as well. So you can get an even bigger one hit with that one if you don't want to use the ring, for instance, because it's 100% increased damage, for instance, on this guy. If you don't want to use either the 48%, the glove, or if you just want to get a guaranteed overpower here. This one's 20% from the critical strike. This one's 48%. This one's 100%. So you can see they're a little bit conflicting between the two of them. But I like having the multiple guaranteed overpower. Makes it a little bit easier on the boss anyway. So that is my items that I'm using, and it has worked quite well. It is a little bit different than some of the other ones I've seen. For instance, the Max Roll guide would tell you to use the damage that against stunned people, for instance, on the two-hander. I kind of bypassed that one and put the hammer on there because I'm more focused on trying to one-shot the bosses, and then the combination of being able to do this right here, which guarantees me the critical strike from that, and then I get the guaranteed overpower from swapping, basically guarantees I can always one-shot something, and then all I have to do is dash through somebody to gain vulnerable, and then I can one-shot. That's pretty much the full build. The Paragon board follows the same thing as you can see in the Max Row guide, which is I'm going to use Ire here. Just kind of go through this quickly. I think the link will do a better job showing you the Paragon board. You can see that I haven't even maxed out all of these yet here, and it still works. Territorial goes here. Yes, we are taking Blood Rage. If you go here, we're going to be taking Carnage, and then we're using Might here as well. And then we scroll on over here. We're going to be using the Overpower from the Maces. Obviously, that's going to work very well with this, which is Crusher. And then I did take Decimator. And then up here, you skip the Warbringer. That's just Fortify. Don't really need it. And then this gives you Exploit, which is where you get your vulnerability from if you're not going to be, for instance, using the vampiric powers I talked about, or if it's a non-seasonal character or something like that, I suppose. And then we go up here to take a Bonebreaker. And all of this can be seen once again on the Max Row Paragon board. Is what I followed pretty closely for the Paragon board with very, very minor adjustments. That one would do you just fine. So that's my full build, and all together, it works exactly like you can see in the beginning. But there you go. There's a full breakdown of the Hold Up Barb. Hopefully it helped. Consider liking, subscribing if you want to, or come by the live stream today if you have questions about the Barb build. That's about it. I'll see you later.